everybody. Welcome today. I'm Usman Nadeem, founder and CEO of Matrix Tribe Technologies. I'm a CEO, software engineer by profession, and I would like to believe that I'm a software engineer by heart too. Last few years, I've been really exciting with Gen AI, seeming to have unleashed a slew of product ideas our way. We at Matrix Tribe love working and learning, and this session is a learning opportunity for everybody. We develop software products with AI, and would love to have opportunity to work with each one of you. Today, we are joined by David Loin, who is going to be doing a presentation, and I will be your host. Before we go further, I would like to introduce David Loin. David is a TOGAF certified enterprise architect. He's currently working at Bosa Property as a solution architect. He has 25 years of working experience across different organizations, navigating complex technology transformations. He specializes in AI governance frameworks, enterprise architecture, and data strategy implementations, having developed comprehensive governance models for responsible AI adoption, data privacy, model integrity, and ethical deployment. I would now request David to please start. Thank you, David.
Okay, thank you very much and welcome to everybody. Let me get the presentation rolling. So welcome aboard. So as my background further to what Usman says, I've been working in the data space for 30 plus years, did extensive business intelligence projects, ran a PMO for several companies, multiple, about a $70 million budget for the PMO every year. So I have fairly expensive experience of developing projects and pushing things into production. AI has certainly changed the way we work in the last 2-3 years since the LLMs have come out. My way of working has changed immeasurably. And what the aim of this presentation today is sort of take you through, as an extension of the day one presentation, is to take you through sort of the governance and the productionizing of an AI system for the executive levels. So if you do have any questions, please raise your hands, and then Usman will interrupt me to ask the question. I will try and keep an eye on the chat myself, but yeah, I look forward to presenting to you.
Yeah.
Okay, so
David,
AI governance.
David, before we dive in, I have a question. So if a CEO today is listening and he thinks that we're too early for governance, what would you say? Like, what are they exposed to? What risks are they exposed to? Before we begin, I just want to start with this part.
Yeah, no, governance it's an interesting question. I would suggest one thing I've tried to show in this presentation is that governance is actually, it's very important. You need to do it, but it also ties into there's a simpler way of deploying. I have a couple of my own personal methodologies to get people up to speed with governance in a faster way without some of the overheads. There are a few Medium articles I published about it. It's sort of bringing some of the lessons learned from business intelligence processes. But what I'll do is I'll talk about that when I get to in the next few slides. Okay, so let's quickly go through and I'll get to governance and I'll raise that when we're there. So from what I'm going to do today is basically go through AI governance. What do we need? Who needs to be doing it? What do you need to do for governance? I want to talk about compliance frameworks as well, because AI is new. There's limited compliance frameworks out there. Are getting developed. They're very much work in progress. AI seems to be changing the game a lot in how we do things, the way we work, the way we respond, the way we communicate. AI is changing all these methods. And I think there's a lot of issues that compliance frameworks are trying to play catch up to work out what we can do. It's really AI is a hacker space at the moment rather than a formalized space. But unfortunately, it's a space that if you want to succeed, you need to get into. So you need to make sure you have the basics, fundamentals. I also want to look at organizational readiness and change management. How do you get your company ready to accept AI and how do you actually build them out? And then risk management, vendor evaluation. A lot of companies aren't going to be able to do this solo. They're going to need help from other people. So you need to make sure you choose your vendors well, and you need to make sure you have your risks understood. You don't want to identify too many risks, that will just scare you off, but you need to know what the risks are likely to be and how you can actually mitigate them. And then after that, it's how we scale it out. How do you actually develop, get from your POC development through to your actual full-scale enterprise deployment? And then I've done a very quick thing on investment justification and ROI. It's very much a finger in the air calculation for those two, but we'll get and talk about those more as we go on. So let's talk about governance first. So governance, you've got employees are going to be using ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, or whatever their favorite AI bot, even Grok, because it answers questions for them. People are finding it very comforting. They can go into AI, they can ask questions they're scared to ask other people, and they get answers that are favorable, but they're variable. And so if you've got your employees using multiple chat engines, they're going to get different replies. They're going to get necessarily the incorrect replies. They're going to get hallucinations. So you need to make sure you've got governance in place at a basic level to understand what your employees are doing and guiding your employees on how to use your AI tools within a work environment. There are a few people who are posting out prompts now on Reddit and various other threads of how to actually find out information, what other people are posting, what other things cross transfer. So AI aren't necessarily inert. Every question changes some of that memory, some of that context. Some manufacturers are taking that feedback, the chat history, they're piling it back into the LLMs and they're training them on that answers as well. So at some point, somewhere in the system is a verbatim copy of that conversation if they are using your data to train their model. And there are ways of retrieving those things, and people are working out prompts to get it because it's a phenomenal IP space and people want to exploit it. To get governance in place, it does take time. And the most important thing is you need direction from the owner and the CEO of the company. It needs to be driven from the top down, but it also needs to be grassroots as well, that you need to make sure that people understand why we're doing it. So when you're setting up your committee, now the committee is always a fun one. You need to have some people who are going to set decisions and make decisions about what AI is. At the executive level, you need to understand, what is AI to us? How do we want to use it? What are we intending to do with it? And so get your AI committee, get your CEO committee and get some feedback from some of the lower level people who are using it. Identify people using AI currently who seem to be knowledgeable, bring them in, ask them the types of questions they have, go join local AI meetup groups and ask questions there. There's a very good one in BC called Van AI, or BC Plus AI, run by Chris Krug. And that's a fantastic eclectic group of people who are discussing the cutting edge of AI. And it's amazing, those discussions. You go every month. There's about 4 or 5 meetings every month, but they do discussion. They talk about these sort of problems. What are we going to encounter? Where is it going? What are we trying to do with it? And if the executive don't understand what they're trying to do with AI, the AI program will fail. So the executives need to set the compass of where we want to go. They also need to understand that compass is only a guidance. It's not a definitive path. AI will change. The direction you're looking in may change, but you need to be responsive. So make sure your governance committee is set up well, that it's dynamic, that it's got the power to be able to set and influence the rest of the organization. The next thing is, what is governance? Really, it's just seeing what you're doing. It's having the authority to make decisions about it, and it's being accountable for those decisions. So we have the executive committee in place, setting the direction, setting the ideas, setting the tone of how we're going to use AI, and then delegating that accountability down into the team so they can deliver, and giving them the authority to make decisions that follow that North Star, and then having a means to actually track back and see what you're doing. You have governance. You don't necessarily need to have data stewards. You don't necessarily need to have full committee fold down, full committee procedures. You just need to know who is accountable, who has the authority to make a decision, and how do I see whether that decision has an impact on the organization. So if you got those 3 things, you have governance. And that's the simple way of doing it. And this is when, going with Usman's question earlier on, make sure you track those 3 things: accountability, authority, and visibility, and make sure you assign those clearly with insight and with follow-up to various members of your organization, and give them the space to develop and work on how to use AI properly. Yeah. So then we go on to who has the authority. So the authority bit is important. You need to know who is making those decisions, who is making budget allocation. And again, we're doing this D class. You need to make sure that as a committee, what are we doing? Where is our direction? It's the entire organization. You want to basically have the executive board setting the AI direction. For big vendors, I wouldn't necessarily engage vendors straight off the bat, but be aware of what vendors do what. There are small consultancy firms that can do some very good help. There are also large consultancy firms that can do some very expensive help. They're all useful in their own way. And there are also vendor firms who are producing lots of AI enhanced tooling. You need to understand and have a way of selecting those vendors so you know the risks and you know how to select them. Again, this is at the executive level. You need to set that direction of how we choose our various types of vendors. So define the types of vendors you need for AI. So support through to consultancy, to guidance, through to product delivery, through to product implementation, through to training or whatever. Make sure you got guidelines in place about how you're going to select those vendors. The use cases is the next one. What are we going to use AI for? I'm working for one company at the moment. We are trying to set a set of use cases. We go round around the shops on how to actually select those use cases. We're not quite sure quite what we want to do. We don't want to impact the customer. We don't want to impact the business too much, but we only know we need to actually roll out various initiatives. And so in discussions, it's trying to work out what are clear, good quality use cases. In my previous day one seminar, I talked extensively about your types of use case and use case selection. So if you want to find out information, refer back to that day one seminar. And then budget allocation. AI costs money. My own personal budget for AI is roughly about $150 to $200 a week in tokens. And that is developing various applications for me. It's building up various frameworks. It's building up various orchestrations. From a corporate level, you can talk thousands of dollars a week or thousands of dollars a month, depending what you want to do, depending who you're using. So again, allocate how much do you want to spend on this bet? How much do you want to put forward to working on AI? What are the step up increments? So if we achieve X, how much can we increase the budget by? So plan what you're going to do based on those outcomes. So do a very quick high level thumb in the air. We're going to give 2,000 to it for the next 2 months. We'll dedicate a team of 2 people to work out some POCs, but we'll do a step up on success and we'll treble that budget. We'll bring the team up to 5. And we make sure that's communicated to that team who are doing that work so they know that when that goal is met or missed, there is a way of actually moving on and working out what you do for the next step. So when you're doing your planning, make sure you've got gates in there, make sure you have the ability to gate and change direction as well. Because as AI goes, I mean, if you look at the current situation with Grok, they're trying to take Grok down because of what it's being used for on X. And yeah, it's being misused, it's being misaligned, but it's destroying a tool that potentially could be useful. But it's also, again, it's being misused. And so be prepared. Your engine, your LLM of choice may be taken down. It may disappear. Claude did a massive rewrite of how they accept users this week, and they changed the way that third-party vendors connect to Claude. So OpenAI have basically jumped in and said, we don't do that. We're going to give full support. But you have to remember that OpenAI are going to use your prompts to train, and other systems are going to use, like Claude doesn't use your prompts to train. You can exclude yourself. But OpenAI will use your prompts to train future models. So you've got to work out, is that a risk worth taking? So there's swings and balances on how you do it. Your security architecture. What are you going to do about how you're going to protect your IP? What are you going to allow people to upload to these AI? If you use something like Copilot and you have a Microsoft license, you are covered under that IP constraint of that license. I mean, Copilot, as far as I can see, is probably one of the more IP sensitive AI engines there is, except for self-hosting. But if you're going to self-host, you then got to pay for GPU cost, you got to pay for cloud cost, you got to pay for infrastructure costs if you want to host on-prem. But again, manufacturers are producing tools to do that. So Lenovo have just produced a LLM in a box tool. So a $5,000 computer, run a 300 billion parameter model that you can run on your own prem. And so if you want to be a home hobbyist or you want to be a small firm or you want to be a large enterprise, you can set up a very cheap for solar farm, $5,000 a pop, and you've got one model per mod box. And then you're just paying cost and support for that infrastructure. And then you got your deployment. How are you going to deploy these agents out into the organization? So get your enterprise architect involved in that, get your solution architect, get your technical team involved. Is how do we roll this deployment into production? Are we going to use Teams as an interface? Are we going to use different chat interfaces? Are we going to interface it with Slack and have a Slack bot that people can send requests in? Or we're going to have a formal portal where people go to a site, they type in that request in our formal portal, and then the files are managed that way? Or are you going to use something like Salesforce, which has an AI environment built in? And so you've got Agentforce, which actually does a really good job at isolating and protecting your PI data. So lots of questions, lots of things to do with governance, but make sure you have the basics of government, which is basically your visibility, your authority, and your accountability. So let's look at this. And when you're actually running your governance program, what levels, when do you need to actually bring that committee in place? I would recommend meeting on a very good cadence. Make sure you got a good cadence to keep the momentum going. Ideally, at board level, do it quarterly to make sure you're setting the direction, the compass for where you want with your AI project. You got your feedback. You want to have tactical reviews and say, are we meeting our goals? Are we aligning to the compass? What are our blockings? What do we need? Do we need to bring more people in? Do we need to change the use cases? Make sure you have those on a monthly basis so you at least got a definite check-in, and make sure the use cases are understood, people are writing them up well, they're reviewing the risks, and they're making sure that the vendors, if we're using them or you're using them, are actually engaged as well in those tactical reviews. And then the last bit is if something happens, who do you need to get involved and how do you escalate up to make a decision? So let's say you've got an AI engine going out and someone uploads your internal ledger to the AI engine to do some time series analysis because they heard that AI does some very good time series analysis using certain tools. And they upload your entire account system into an AI engine to do processing, and it's a public AI. How do you remediate that? You need to have an immediate response to it. So as part of your security, of your SOC 2 or various other, your control, your PI control systems, engage your security people so that they have their alerts in place. So when these systems are exfiltrated out of the system, you have a way of capturing it, hopefully preventing it happening in the first place, but at least you have a way of responding and working out what is our exposure. And for larger corporations, it's more important. For small corporations, it could be overhead, but make sure you understand where your PI is. Make sure you know where your personal information is, and make sure your employees who are using AI are trained well enough that they understand it. So the next thing is let's look at the compliance frameworks. So you've got your AI in place, you've got your governance committee in place, and you want to start actually selling your AI tooling to the world. You want to start going and saying, we have this tool, we have this way of working. But even for your customers, we are now using AI, let's say, to produce our training manuals, or we're using AI to do analysis of our data and work out what is the best way of actually giving you a responsive service. You need to disclose that you're using AI to your customers. If they're going to do that, you also then need to make sure you're aware of the compliance frameworks. Compliance frameworks are adapting. They're modifying. AI is a changing space. So what you want to do is be aware of what you're doing. SOC 2, I would say, is critical. Always make sure you go for SOC 2 as soon as you possibly can. It's going to produce a way of working. It's going to produce a way of understanding who your vendors are. It's going to give you a way of checking your risks. It's overhead, but to me, I think it improves the quality and the way you work in your company, and it gives you a good way of monitoring, especially if you use something like Vanta or Struts or one of the other Vanta or compliance vendors out there. They have tools to actually do the monitoring for you. And there's actually a couple of really good startups. I think one of the attendees here, Margaret Devor, is coming up with a really good risk management framework. So reach out to her and make sure that you can actually talk to her, and she will help you, guide you with some of these risk questions. And then you've got your emerging acts. Sorry about the cat running by there. We got your EU Act. They're trying to build out an all-encompassing system of how to actually control, contain, and monitor the whole way things work. Let me just quickly go. And then vendor specific, if you're healthcare, you need to have HIPAA. And also, if you're using any healthcare diagnostic products or any healthcare related products, you also got your FDA approval. If you're doing your FDA, SOC 2 helps you immeasurably, even though unfortunately the two standards aren't linked. The bulk of the work you do for SOC 2 will drive you for FDA. There's one company I worked for, we got them SOC 2 and we were able to get, they've just finally got their FDA approval. It took a year to go in, but they got their FDA because we had SOC 2 in place, because we had various mechanisms in place. They're now a very good, secure, FDA approved diagnostic AI tooling vendor now. And then you got your voluntary standards. So let's quickly go into what
I
they
have
actually do.
I
Yep,
have
sure,
one
go ahead.
question, David. So is it
Mm.
realistic to retrofit AI controls into existing SOC 2 or GDPR programs, or you think companies are underestimating the effort?
It's really, I mean, if you're following a standard CI/CD, if you're following standard process control, if you're doing SOC 2, you'll have to retrofit. If you are SOC 2, you're going to have to put it into your system. So, but I mean, in terms of the measurement control, AI depends on your data. If you've already got SOC 2, you've already got SOC 2 applying to your data systems.
Yeah,
You've got your CI/CD, your SOC 2 is already going to cover your CI/CD.
that's true.
All you're basically going to do is probably add a different set of risks to it. You're going to add a different set of vendor selection. So you've got your vendor support, your vendor, so your different types of vendors that you're going to have for your AI. You've got more risks being added to it. There is a higher chance your risk for exploitation of data has probably gone up by having AI. But again, your SOC 2 controls, it's all covered under SOC 2. I would say it's going to have to be done if you are SOC 2. And if you're doing SOC 2, build it in from the get-go. It will really help you work. And yeah, I'm actually a very strong advocate of SOC 2, as you can probably tell. I found it when I deployed it for one of my companies, and we got them up to speed. Our way of working, the amount of noise that we had in communication between teams dropped. The noise dropped, but the communication increased because all of a sudden we had policies, we had procedures in place. They were very simple procedures. We built it out with a 2-man team. It took us 6 months to get it working, 3 months of monitoring to get it down to the 100% coverage under Vanta. Then we had the auditor come in. They did 2 audits. And so within 9 months, we had SOC 2 certification. And it was fast, aggressive. We had Cobalt help us do that. And Vanta was the application tool we did for that system. So there are various companies that can help you with SOC 2. And so there are
And
ways, so reach out, talk to Usman. He'll be able to guide you as well on some of these internal controls. Anyway,
yeah,
carry on, Usman. So.
and if you don't mind describing the company's size and everything, let's just to get an estimate for the amount of effort that it took for that size of company, 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, so the 6 to 12 months, we were a 55-person company.
I
Vanta
see.
have a threshold of 50 users in their company where you go up and license fee once you exceed 50. We negotiated them to keep us in because we were 5 people above. But again, in terms of the workload you're doing, if you're
And
doing any development, if you're doing
it was
any,
a SaaS company, like they were keeping data.
yeah, we were keeping data. We had
I
SaaS
see.
information. We also had SaaS tools. So one of the tooling was a medical triage system
All
for
right.
imaging, and so we had really strict GDPR, health HIPAA controls we had to put in place. So we did SOC 2 with HIPAA. We By the time we finished our SOC 2, we were 75% complete on ISO 27001. So we could have gone and bitten the bullet and gone for the full 27001, which is an amazing standard. But yeah, reach
Yeah,
out to an
yeah.
expert who can take you through that. But it does take you a lot longer because your procedures have to be a lot more locked down. It's almost like combining ISO 9001 with SOC 2, with HIPAA, with GDPR and various other things. If you got all those things and full accounting controls, then you can get a 27001. So it's basically track what you do, know what you do, monitor what you do, inform how you do it, make sure there's remediation and response to things going out of way. If you have all that, then you've basically got ISO 27001. And then, yeah, so there are various other standards. So NIST is also another good one. So if you're a government company, look at NIST. It
Yeah.
is hefty, but it is also, I mean, it's more bureaucratic than any of the other systems, but it's also a fun standard to actually look at. I mean, fun I'm using in the, I'm one of the guys who likes reading standards. So for me, reading a standard is a fun thing to do. NIST is very powerful, has a lot of really good insight. It's been put together well. There's a lot of overhead with it as well. So it could be cut down and could be simplified. And you could make it slightly less. So it's how do you reduce the bureaucratic overhead but get the benefits of that system is the main aim. Okay, so let's move on from any questions about compliance from anybody else in the room.
No, I guess we keep moving.
Okay, cool. And then let's go and look at your data protection. So let's go for, so data protection is, the reason why I drew this one out is I want to make sure that we are helping you understand AI is driven by your data. Your data is what drives AI. If you don't have good data, you don't have good knowledge of what you do, AI is not going to work for you. So when you're doing your data protection and you're going to use AI on your data, work out what data you're going to be. You've got to work out what data is going to be part of this process. What data is affected by my organization? What systems do I have? What processes I have? Work out what's affected. Scope and look at that and say, right, what in there do I need to protect? What do I need to do for process control? I need to inform people and give them process control. For data, I need to work out what data I'm exposing. Once you got that sort of worked out and who is affected by that, what is the risk from each of those roles? That gives you your scope. Then you look at your risks arising from that. So let's say you have a intern in your company and you gave them access to your GL and you basically asked them to do some AI analysis, time series analysis, to do some, let's say, a very, very simple model for prediction on future work. They're going to take that and they're going to take us export from that GL and they're going to shove it into an AI and say, give me a future model or a predictive model based on this data. That's a risk. So how do you minimize that type of risk? Look at your pathways that your data and your processes will bleed out to that will impact your organization. Then once you got that, you then use your risks and your scope to apply remediation. So what controls do I need to put in place? So if it's a database, I want to make sure I have audit logs of who accesses what data and when they access the data. If you're doing exploitation, you want to look at what documents have been sent out via my chat channels. So what are the way people can get chat data out of my system? So if you look at something like Claude, you can actually upload files to Claude in a personal project. That can be accessed by an account outside the computer. So let's say a user sets up their own personal Claude account. They can upload files via the browser and then they can retrieve the files from their home use. That's a loss of control. So you want to make sure, do I want to lock down access to Claude? Or do I want to have procedures in place that you cannot upload files on our system? Or if you're using Claude, you can only use our assigned user accounts. You ideally don't want to have shadow IT in the place. You don't want users using their own personal accounts for AI engine to do work, because that is a definite bleed. So that's another pathway. Again, we can help you and guide you on choosing and scoping where these exploitation points are going to happen. And there's some very good security consultants who go into the more detail about some really deep stuff about how to actually identify all that stuff. Then once you've got your remediation pathways, what do you need to actually do to minimize the risks? What do you need to protect? You can then look at saying, okay, fine, let's go to the stakeholders, our DPO, and let's actually go and say, this is what we need to protect. How do we do it? How do we get it? So then you understand what is our risk to our organization if we use AI. I mean, you should be doing this for data anyway, but it's going to give you a way of actually saying, this is where we are, this is what we have, this is where the risks are. Okay, the auditor. So actually, I'm going really slow on this deck. Sorry about that. I'm going to have to speed up a bit because we're 30 minutes in. The auditor, what's the auditor? When you actually got your compliance, an auditor is going to come in and look at your system. He's going to ask you what AI systems you've got in place. What are they accessing? If you don't know that, you're not ready for your audit. Know where your data is, know where your systems are, know where your applications are, know your shadow IT. And if you know that and you go to your auditor and you're minimizing your shadow IT, you are basically ahead of the game for a lot of people. And if you can demonstrate that to the auditor, then they'll progress to actually looking at how you're controlling it. So the auditor will ask for your policies. He's going to ask for your risk register. Where have you documented that stuff? Your data flow diagrams. Again, tools like Vanta and some of the other compliance tools are going to help you build these frameworks out. And they are beautiful because they actually do track so many things. They integrate in your systems. They can pull up your controls. They can integrate with your ticketing system. They can create tickets in there. They can respond to tickets in there. So some of these compliance tooling are absolutely fantastic. I would not suggest going solo on those things. They are expensive, but the headache they reduce are amazing. And then for technical evidence, they're going to look for, they're going to, sorry about that, clicking the wrong place. So they're going to ask for technical evidence as well. So you have something like Vanta or you have some of the tools, you're going to be able to demonstrate that you have these systems in place. And if you've got Azure set up, you're going to have your logging on there so you know who's logging log. If you've got AWS, you've got the way of logging in through your CloudWatch and through your other tools to work out who has accepted what. Your PII detection, as long as you've identified what your data, you know who's accessing those various PI systems. And then your disaster recovery again, when things go wrong, when all problem, all hell breaks loose. How do you recover? What is our plan? I know some companies have got disaster recovery is this market is not for us anymore. If they go down, they're not going to try and get back into the market again. They'll just drop out the market and they'll go and do something else. That's one level of disaster recovery. That's the extreme form is we're annihilated, we'll give up and go somewhere else. We'll take the money and run. Other companies want to recover. They got things like they're on mission critical work. They're providing medical coverage to people. They have to get up to speed. So your disaster recovery and your testing of how you've done it, prove that you've gone through a disaster recovery and you've done your backups properly, are vital to an auditor as well. So let's look at organizational readiness things. I'm going to actually speed up a little bit more on these slides. So how do I know my organization is ready and how do I get my organization ready? So why do initiatives fail? So a lot of the times the technology is there. There are companies who are very successfully using AI to do work. There are also companies that are very successfully using AI to build tools that can hack into their company. There was a Gordon this weekend, there was a Reddit thread for one guy who set up a company to do this website. He posted it on Reddit about how successful he was. It was all AI built. He then posted a week later saying, I'm having to shut down my organization because people have hacked it, because he vibe coded the entire system. He didn't bother doing any security checks on it. He didn't bother doing any verification. He didn't do any monitoring. He basically bragged about his success. He built a good tool that people wanted to use, but because he hadn't put the measures in control in the back end, he failed because he wasn't secure. Don't be that company. You'll have a successful product, but you'll then create a massive issue with how you actually respond to problems and react to them, and your costs will go up. So what you want to do is the first thing is make sure your AI team has literacy in AI. They understand what AI is. You change management, you've got to get rid of your resistors. You've got to get rid of the people who are going to not rid of them. Sorry, you've got to mitigate and you've got to respond to them. People are scared that AI will replace my job. I find that AI has not replaced my job, it's made my job easier. I find I can fire off an AI search orchestration that goes and collects information. It gives me multiple viewpoints. It uses multiple engines. And then it gives me a report. And those reports are like 50, 60, 100 pages with full references, verified references with summaries of why it used those references. So when I'm reading through that report, I have a very detailed scope of what is out there in the real world. I can also then run Google checks on the back end to say, okay, let's go look at Google. If I search this on Google, if I was going to do this myself, does this verify to the report? And I generally find now the matches are getting a lot better. Interpretation is still a little bit weird, but in terms of collecting, aggregating, picking relevant factors, AI is pretty powerful at that. And then the next one is executive sponsors. If you have AI on the side of the desk as some guys developing the product, but the executive are not involved, you are going to have problems because that project will get deprioritized, will get kicked off. Someone else can swoop in and take it. Someone else can turn out and undermine it. And so if you've got various people, make sure the executives are aware and they sponsor these projects. So they are official projects in the company. So you can track them, you have standard controls on top of them, and you make sure that they are supported. The next one is leaders' accuracy of AI. Is that a lot of people expect AI to be perfect. It's not perfect. I think people are beginning to understand that AI is not perfect. It hallucinates. Back in the day, last year, people expected accuracy from AI and they thought it would be accurate. It isn't. It basically is an aggregation of common thing. It's a word picking engine. There is a little bit smarter to it in the way it picks those words, but it's basically picking the next word based on some probability based on the input stream that you put in there and some of the engines you have with there. And so AI is not accurate. It's only as good as the data it's able to absorb, and it's able to actually aggregate into a way that it can make sure predictions on the next phrases come out. Use case selections. Again, when you're doing your use cases for the AI, pick something that is not too complex. You want to make sure that if you have something that's highly complex, it's going to fail. If it's high stakes, so it's high impact to the business, it's going to fail. You want to pick for your first use cases something which has good impact on the organization, so it's a net improvement on a current process, a good enough process that the business see that net improvement, but it's not so complex that it actually can potentially break the way the company works. So you got to sort of, it's very careful how you pick those use cases for it. Again, day one, we talked more extensively about it. And so what we found is that organizations that invest for training, do change management communication are actually far better. So make sure you communicate that you are doing AI to the organization. Make sure that you have change management in place to actually understand the reservations that people have. Those reservations are valid. There are concerns that people have. If you can understand what their concerns are and respond to them, you'll have advocates that will help you support that program and make sure it works. You also want to make sure your team is well trained. And then if you have those things in place, you are likely to succeed in AI. So how
So
do you assess your,
I have
yeah,
one question here. You mentioned
mm,
82% organizations are failing in implementing AI. What are
yeah.
the human factors? I'm sure it's mostly because of human factors. What are the human factors that we are underestimating generally, which cause
Uh,
it?
so the human factors are really, it's resentment. I mean, if you look at some of the projects I've rolled out over the last, actually 5 years now since LLMs first started emerging. Um, a lot of the times it stemmed from understanding. What is AI? What does it mean? What are we trying to do with it? So people don't understand what it can do and how it can do what we have and how can it help us. You then are going to come up with use cases which don't match what AI can achieve. So you've got a mismatch between use cases and what AI can do. So make sure you understand that can AI serve this use case? A lot of things, use cases, a RPA system can solve that use case. It's not AI, does not need it. Where you need AI is on aggregation type functionality, where you're looking at highlighting or organizing unstructured data and looking at ways of turning it into structured data. AI is very powerful at doing that. It's pulling out insights in data. It's very good at looking at commonality. So it's a very good way of actually highlighting and emphasizing key points within documents. But again, you have a scale size that you can't pass in a 1,000-page document and expect it to process the entire document. So again, understand the technology and make sure the use cases support the technology, what it can do, and make sure the users understand the limitations of the technology when they're doing the use cases. And then again, the AI will replace my job factor is quite high. People want it to fail. In the old business intelligence days, when we went in to do business intelligence companies, we had a lot of people who say, this will replace my job. I create this report, that's all I do. When you actually go and look at what they are supposed to do, what their jobs are, you find that there's something else that they can't do because of they're doing this report. You actually find a way of talking to them, coming up with management, building out a new role for them within the organization that either goes back to what they should have been doing in the first place, because they, instead of generating this report, because it's normally something that came up, but you find you have an advocate at that point because you basically give them purpose, you're re-engineering their work, and you're giving away. AI is going to have the same impact on organizations. We're going to see massive organizational change over the next few years as AI rolls out. And so be prepared for that. And then executive sponsor is again the other one, which is that if the executive aren't backing you up on the AI initiative and it's a side desk project, it's not going to work either because you're going to have no controls in place. You're going to implement something that cannot be deployed into production. I've been around where people have gone out and they found these lovely tools. There's so many vaporware tools to do various work to help with like testing, CI/CD development pipelines. And they roll them out, they do a test pilot, and then they go to the executive and say, look, we built this tool, this is fantastic. Security person turns around and says, where's this data going? What is it? Oh, we can't use this. So now you've wasted 3 or 4 months developing and testing this tool out to actually get it scrapped because it didn't match security at the beginning. So if you engage and do your governance at the beginning, so you have your um, visibility, your authority, and your accountability set in place, you're going to help and ensure that your AI project is working. So your governance will give you the authority, the accountability, and the visibility. Your organizational use cases will give you what can we do with AI. You match those two together, you're going to get a very nice project that is going to be realistic, it's going to be monitored, it's going to be supported, it's going to more likely succeed. Does that answer your question, Osman?
Yes, yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, so let's whip on a bit more. I've got, yeah, good. I've got another 20 minutes or so. Halfway through. So in terms of organizational readiness, when you're doing your readiness assessments, like any maturity assessment, I mean, how many of you have done maturity assessments of your organization? You have this lovely checklist. You go through, oh, I do this. Oh, I do. Oh, I have process. Oh, I have this. Be honest when you're doing maturity indexes. The amount of companies who will fill out a maturity index, they'll do their assessment. They'll say, yes, we have process for everything. But they forget that their key process is not documented. They forget that their key person, they've got one guy who's sitting, or one person that's sitting in some room that's doing this little script they've written that holds up the entire system. That's not part of the process. It's grandfathered into the system, to use an old phrase, and they don't realize it needs to be documented. Be honest. Look at your process flows. Look at what you do. Make sure you know every single touch point along that process before you do your readiness assessment. And just be aware of what you are measuring when you do your readiness, and be honest. And I would suggest be more conservative than optimistic when you do readiness assessment. It's easier to catch up if you underestimate what you do than it is to roll back when you overestimate what you do. Because if you overestimate, you're not going to be prepared for the length of time it's going to take to cover that gap that you overestimated on. So be conservative, be pessimistic, map the gaps knowledgeably, prove you have the gap, fix the gap, and bring it back. So if you look at TOGAF for EA, that's really like saying, we want to be at this level. Our target architecture is this. Our current architecture is this. Our gap is X. When you do that target gap analysis or the current target gap analysis, you then know whether your maturity assessment is correct or not, because that will validate you and give you proof that your assessment is correct. So if you want to do true assessment, get your EA involved and they can drive you through a very good assessment process. And then your literary training. So who do you need to train? I would suggest if you're having an AI initiative, get all your employees trained on AI from the get-go. Work out what you want from the AI. So explain it. You want to say how to use AI. So you're going to stress the importance about, okay, people are going to use Claude for a while, let's say. It's going to happen. Please don't upload documents that are sensitive data. Don't load any corporate documents up to AI for analysis. It's sort of, I've used Claude now for several years. I've used ChatGPT as well. And it's interesting when you actually look at, when you ask it to say, give me a summary of all my chat history. Give me, where do you think I work? What sort of work do you think I do? How do you think I work? Those sort of questions. Both chat engines have a very good view of who you are because of the types of questions you ask. Even if you're not bleeding out PII, you're bleeding out situational context, and AI can pick up on that situational context. So when you're training your employees, make sure that you understand that situational context. You also want to make sure that you have an AI policy in place. What can we do? What can't we do? That is very important as a boundary to set for the organization. Because when an employee goes and does something, if they've read the AI policy and they still do it, you can then work out why did they do it? What was the reason? You do the remediation, you do the fix, you do the impact analysis, you modify the policy to adapt to that particular constraint. You may need to put governance constraint, you may need to put hardware constraints in place, you may need to put technical constraints, or you may need to have managerial constraints in place to fix those gaps. But make sure every employee in your company has an awareness that AI is being used in this organization. These are the remits and these are the boundaries and these are the controls and these are the penalties if you misuse it. Your tier 2 users, your power users. So these are the people who are going to make AI sing for you. They're really your conductors. They're the guys who are making a nice choir. They're going to produce beautiful choruses. They're going to produce beautiful things out of it. They need to understand a lot more about how to do this well. If they're using something like N8N, or they're using Kamuda with some of the plugins, or they're using Power Automate with plugins, Zapier with various maps, LangChain, all these other tools, they need to understand how to set it up for success. What are good ways of prompting? If you do look at Salesforce documentation on Agentforce, they have extensive training trailheads all about prompting and how to set up prompts. That prompt training is actually a really good lesson. So I would look at the Salesforce trailheads for prompt development and prompt using for Agentforce. Even if you're not a Salesforce shop, I would still recommend doing the trailheads for Agentforce, because it's going to help you understand how Salesforce use AI, what types of use cases you can use for AI. Can you take any of that IP and apply it to your own systems? And then you're also going to look at your power user is going to have a lot more knowledge about how to use it, how to make sure it's efficient, how to use it, optimize it. So again, a lot more training, but it's role specific. So you want to work out, and so you need time to develop these training materials. If you have good change management, you should have good training systems inside your organization. You should be able to develop a good corpus of training to help these power users. And this is where sometimes people engage vendors to come up with those training materials because they've done it for other companies. They'll have that sort of job description roughly defined. It's a quick modification rather than rewrite from scratch. And then your tier 3 people are your technical teams. So these are the guys who either write the hardware, write the software, build the systems, support the systems. They have to have a lot more knowledge because they're going to have to support many situations that are even unpredicted. So they're going to have to be adaptable, and they're going to have escalation pathways, and they're going to have ways of responding to the business. Okay. Change management. This is the important thing. If you don't have change management, if you don't have a way of rolling out changes to your organization, of communicating the changes out, and actually building out a system, you're going to fail. If people don't know what you're doing, you're going to fail. Change management is such a lovely discipline that it helps you understand how to motivate, how to train, how to communicate, how to recognize what needs to be communicated out to your team. Make sure you've got a good change management policy in place. There's various certification bodies. Make sure you've got a good certified change management in your organization, and give them the space so they can actually go and work effectively, and make sure they're working as part of the team so that they understand what's going on. They can get ahead of the material, make sure that communication they can help the BAs on collecting resentment within the system as they go out and do it. They can talk to various users. Why don't you want to use it? Why do you like using it? That information can feed back as well. And so it's going to give you ability to actually set up a communication pathway. It's going to get you selecting some champions inside your organization who are going to advocate for AI. They understand the goal, the North Star, where you're aiming, and they can then keep people, persuade people, show people, demonstrate how AI can help and how AI is not a threat to them. It's actually an enhancement to the business. And then you want to pick your quick wins. Again, you're going to look at what can we change that's high value to the organization with low complexity, pick those things, make sure they're communicated out. And then sports, and then you've got your feedback loop. So how do you actually understand whether it's worked? So setting up a good change management process is important. Okay, so let's look at the next piece, risk and vendor evaluation. Let me just take a quick breather for 1 second. Does anybody have any questions, or is it all fascinating so far?
It's been quite interesting so far. Thank you so much, David.
No problem. That's good. Yeah, please don't hesitate to answer questions in the chat, and we'll try and respond to them. So let's go into risk management, and risk is multiple things. So if we look at where AI changes, this risk list is the top 10 this month is actually different to the top 10 last month, and it's different to the top 10 the month before. AI is changing a lot. So really the biggest risk, PII leakages. And then hallucinations, where AI comes up with an answer. I will deal into the top 3 in a more detail in the next slides. So let's look at 4 through to 10 a little bit more carefully. Model poisoning. So this is an interesting one, is that there are ways of injecting prompts into your AI agent that can poison the output. So if you've got someone who's malicious, who's got something they want to do to your company, they can work out how you built your system. They can go and inject prompts in that can potentially change your prompt. They can change the way your AI works. They can override controls. So if you don't have separation between your chats, they don't have separation between concerns. If you're not doing good monitoring on your system, and you don't have good SOC 2 on your vendors, because you'll need your vendors who are providing those LLMs to actually be able to respond to it and give you why that works or how to prevent that mod poisoning, it will affect the way you work. And because if you're using AI for a front-facing, client-facing, high-value initiative, model poisoning is very dangerous to you. Data drift is sort of another one where your data, what you're trying to do, drifts away. So when you're doing agile scrums, you get natural drift in the process and what you're delivering. In data, you get drifts when you're using data in AI LLMs because it's not using canonical models, it's using kind of assumption models and probability models. Things drift away from where you're going. So make sure that you understand how the data that you're using is going to drift if you're using multiple agents to actually process that data. Biases of your LLM is also another one, is make sure your LLM is well trained. One thing that's come out that the data world is finding out is that LLMs are trained on a corpus of public data and documents. They went to all these websites to pull up. Data people don't write many documentation. You got Inman and Kimball, who have both put extensive writing about it. You got the DM Bach. But if you look at data books, there are very few web articles, web subjects about data out there. So when LLMs were built, there is a weakness in data modeling within the LLMs. I think some of that's been addressed now, but one of the calls that came out 2 years ago from some of the data leads is data people need to write more stuff and write more blog articles now, because we realize there's a gap in the LLMs when it comes to data. And because it's a gap and because it's not an extensively used subject area, it's also lots of incorrect. So bad opinion is making its way through as consensus. So make sure you understand what your model was trained on, where those biases are likely to be, and make sure that you are actually being fair and using that in a fair way. Cost overruns. Again, when you use AI, costs can excel. Make sure you've got controls in place. Vendor lock-in, again, is another risk, but again, you're going to have to choose one camp to go with, but make sure you've got ways of twitching between those camps. Regulations are going to change. We know that's going to happen. Again, it's a risk to how we do it. And then skills gap, we can mitigate that by training. So let's look at the top 3 in more detail, though. So really the first one is PII leak. This is really which is going to affect you heavily. If you leak out sensitive data of your clients into an LLM and it gets managed to get discovered elsewhere, or it gets pushed out or found, you have a massive leak risk. So you're going to have to disclose. And so that is an impact to your system. Make sure your PII is known, what documents are sensitive. This is where your AI policy, your visibility, your monitoring all come into place. Make sure you know where your PII is. Hallucination control. Again, hallucinations I think are getting less now, but they still have that capability. Hallucinations arise from poor prompting, from poor setting the guidelines of what you're trying to do, or asking a fringe question where the data is not good. So I have a series of prompts that I look for where I'm using various ways of putting controls in place. So I ask every single thing you present has to have a URL reference. So you need to search the web for verification of what you've just said. And give me that reference, give me why you've used those pages to verify what you've just told me. And then only then do I want the answer. So every fact you present must be justified, verified, and have the reference and the fact basis attached to it. It takes longer, uses way more context tokens, but it gives you a more assured answer. So again, it's a way of minimizing your hallucinations.
I think there's a danger there as well. You can have references that actually back what the LLM is saying, but there can also be references which do not back what LLM is saying. So there's a bias there, right? So
there's a potential bias. One thing you can actually do is ask for it to give you opposing cases. So there are ways of saying, give me 3 or 4 opinions about this fact. Tell me why it's true, why it's wrong, and tell me where it's wrong, where it's true. So there are various ways of prompting in that system. So I have about 4 or 5 paragraphs that sort of cover the bias, the referencing, the verification, the fact checking, the asking questions. So if the AI doesn't understand, ask it to ask questions and give it some concrete examples. So some prompts can be very, very large when you're actually building them out. There's some very good articles out there. So if you look at, where is it? Simon Wadley has some interesting takes on AI, but not necessarily how to actually do the prompts. But there's some very good people on LinkedIn who do good prompting, and the names are forgetting me, unfortunately, at the moment. But there's a lot of very good guidance on how you set the prompts up for success. The Salesforce Agentforce information has that information in there as well. So it's sort of giving you a way of checking and making sure you can do what you want to do. So yeah, it is a risk. You have to be aware of it.
In terms of managing bias, do you have any favorites between the frontier LLMs, like for example, ChatGPT? It's like OpenAI or Claude or
Um, that's a good question, actually, because I find that the biases and hallucinations come differently in different
yeah,
engines. They also come in the way you treat them as well. So there is you've probably seen the article that was posted last week by, how was it, the guy from Google, who is saying that AI performs better when you threaten it with violence than if you actually be nasty to it and you get better responses. I find that's not the case. I've got one LLM, one chat history trained in such a way that the LLM will not answer me unless I've done work for it in the first place. So it actually verifies and said, you said you'll do X. Can you show me and demonstrate you've done X? If you haven't done X, I'm not going to give you the answer to what you want to do. And so it's a very interesting that I got it to actually be not combative, but it's more like a counsel and mentor that's actually a gate to me doing more work on a particular subject until I've completed the previous work. And it took probably about 3 months for that behavior to emerge in that chat project. And so I find with things like Claude and ChatGPT, Claude has projects, and those projects are separate context entities. So you can train a project with different personalities. So you can almost have a project that has a personality set to it. And that's pretty good. So you've got it. So you can have an aggressive one, you can have a passive one, you can have a supportive one. You can train it over time in that project to become the kind of personality you want it to be. For ChatGPT, I find that training, it bleeds. Projects aren't self-contained. Context is not contained in a project. It doesn't seem to be. So if I ask a question, it will draw from other projects and answer based on my other projects. So when I'm trying to get isolation, ChatGPT is not as good at isolation as Claude is. But then there are certain cases where Claude actually seems to go into other projects and they'll pull up with these answers like, where the heck did that come from? And then you realize it's read into a different project and pulled information from that project to apply to that particular use case. So again, you have to be aware of how you set up and use these systems.
yeah,
And what is the overall control? And
I have a similar observation, but with OpenAI, like you have to be very explicit to tell it to not be context aware and actually start a new context, and in that case, it actually does that. And it's similar for
well, I found the
Gemini.
context. Yeah. I found the context windows are good, but they are still some bleeding happen between context windows if you're using the same account. So there is some other context somewhere in that system, which is not in our control for the chat bots anyway. But if you're using the LLM yourself natively and you're doing the AI API control, that seems to have the context separation. I haven't seen any bleed on that context separation yet. But again, it's only, again, as they release new versions, they seem to change. So as new versions come out, the way they operate seems to change a little bit. So there have been subtle changes in the way it responds. Again, that's another control you have to have in place.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the last one is prompt injection, is validate how you actually do your prompts, how you validate them. So again, if you're using something like Teams as your interface into the system, you can put controls in your Teams to actually check what's getting uploaded. So the bot, you can actually write in such a way which goes to a webhook. You can check, is there any API in that webhook when that prompt, and then reject the prompt straight away before it hits your LLM. So there are ways you can build, if you put an interface between you and the chat, you can control your PII and your prompt injection far more effectively. So yes. So let's go on to the risk management. When you're doing your vendors, when you're selecting your vendors, so just check, here we are, good. So vendor risk assessment. So when we're doing AI, you're going to use vendors to help you out. You want to understand various things from that vendor. So check for what they have SOC 2, where the data lives, what they are, where is the sovereignty of the data. You want to have, do you have an opt-out for model training? So is your data going to be used to train models? What is the SLA? How often is this model going to be up? And if you anything, is there any way of handling healthcare? If you are sensitive to healthcare data and HIPAA, you need to make sure that the LLM you're using is controlled in such a way. So the key questions are data residency, data retention, model training, and certifications. As long as you get those answers and they're favorable, then the vendor is a good one to keep progressing with. So how do you go about selecting your vendor? So the vendor selection process is lengthy, unfortunately. Some companies seem to stick a finger up in the air saying we have a problem. They go and get a vendor, and within 24 hours, they're using that vendor. It is so much easier now to buy product online with a credit card than it used to be. And 20, 30 years ago, vendor selection had a vendor selection tool or a company division inside the organization. You say, we wanted to use this vendor, or we want a vendor to do X. They'll go out and find vendors for you, and they'll do RFIs and various things. I would be diligent when you're using vendors for AI. Their scope, their approach is going to affect the way you work in an organization. So make sure you understand the types and levels of how you do the vendor. So what I've done here is try to put together a very over bureaucratic way of selecting vendor. As you notice, it's a 6 months, 5-month process to select the vendor properly. But that's including doing a POC and an MVP and having the vendor actually proving that their tool works, and then doing a proper RFP and actually choosing a vendor to support you in the future. So it's worth doing if you're going to use this vendor to drive your work. If there's SI for you, make sure you go through the due diligence, prove they can do the work, prove they support you, prove that you can work with them. And this is what this slide is trying to do. Next one, let's go to scaling and deployment. Okay, so I'm going to talk, we've been talking for an hour. I'm going to try and wrap up in the next 10 minutes. I'll probably skip the ROI and the TOC, total cost of ownership things. I'll do those very quickly. The important thing is rolling out. When we're actually scaling our AI development, we have you want to do your proof of concept, so your basic use case. To prove that AI can work for your organization for some use cases. You want to make sure you have a reasonable success. Not all use cases will work, but choose something that's going to work. So you have your goals. Prove that it works. Pick a couple of use cases. Success rate is that you got the users who are using that use case or respond to that use case are satisfied well enough with the answer that you can progress. Or you may need to loop back and say, AI is important, so let's go and pick a different set of use cases. Those use cases weren't. Make sure you got short circuits and gates in this process so you can actually roll back and start again, because sometimes you will not pick the right use cases. You need to be able to abandon a use case if it's not going well, and make sure the proof of concept team know that if this use case is not working, talk to whoever's driving the strategy and just say, can we drop this one and go for something else because of these reasons? But this is what we've done so far. Document what you did, document why you're not doing it. So put an ADR in there, an architectural decision record, and roll back and select a new set of decision record, a new set of use cases. Once you've got a working use case or a couple of use cases, you then want to actually start deploying it to more users. So you want to roll out to a bigger team. You want to include more use cases. You now have a better idea of what use cases work. So you can start rolling out. You'll also have feedback from the initial users about what use cases help them. And other parts of the company will start saying, oh, you use these 2 use cases. I have a similar use case. Can you do this for me? So the business is going to start coming to you, especially if your change management's working, going to start feeding back and giving you more use cases because they're beginning to understand how AI can support the organization. Again, you don't want to stereotype or typecast your AI based on those use cases because there's more expansive. So choose and talk to people to make sure you have good use cases, but you want to scale it. So you want to get it to more departments. After you got the scaling out and you got it to more people, you're actually then trying to work out, let's get every single person of our company up and running using AI, using our tooling. So you've got better use cases, you've got things in place that are going to affect people's work, they're going to help them do their job, and it's going to help their effectiveness and efficiency. This is where your change management really pays dividends, is because you're going to get the whole organization up to speed, you're going to migrate them off their existing systems onto a AI-based system. You may have to run concurrently on 2 systems until you prove that they work. but at least you're going to be starting to roll out and have impact across the company. And this is where you're going to get a lot of resistance as you roll out across the company, because people who fell in the cracks, people who were living in a dark room and they weren't aware there was a project going on, all going to suddenly find that things have changed. And if you haven't done your good change management or your communication, you're going to find these cracks in the system. Be prepared and support them. So work and make sure that you will discover occasional shadow IT or shadow operatives inside your organization who weren't aware what's going on, and you're changing the way those things work, and things will break. But be careful. Then after that, you want to then optimize, minimize the cost. How do we make this more effective? How do we actually make sure that we deliver and we have a process in place to add new use cases to the system, develop new features and capabilities? But we also want to make sure that what we do is currently optimized, because now you're going to have using data. So you're going to have ways of mapping and saying, this is how we use it. This is where our costs are. How can we reduce our costs? So maybe you find that if you're using a GPU on Azure, we're using it at this rate. It's cheap for us to actually buy our own hardware and host it, or it's better to go to a cloud data farm and hire a dedicated server and host the LLM on that dedicated server than it is for us to use something like Azure or AWS to do the same thing. Or it may be cheaper to go Azure. You don't know until you've got data. So when you're doing your scaling, prove it works to a few users, start getting feedback. Deploy to more users, get more feedback, get more operation, get more impact. Roll out to the organization, find the cracks, find the shadow IT that's affected, mediate, fix, roll out, and then optimize to make sure you're reducing your costs. And then deployment best practices. What can we do? So this is basically giving a massive consensus of various companies. The easiest way of rolling AI is small incremental changes. It works. Make sure you have something that has impact on the organization as well, so that you are able to say, look at X, we've managed to prove X by this factor. We think it's worthwhile. You have then a case to say why it works. Therefore, there's a optimization. There's optimism created within the organization to say AI is going to work for us. And then you want to celebrate your success. So all these projects, make sure you have something like a team meeting saying, let's go and do a lunch and learn, talking about this particular initiative we've done. Get the entire company involved, bring them in, go out for a nice meal or something to celebrate the fact you've done this, but celebrate the win of the AI rolling out. So there's an incentive for people to actually start being part of it, wanting to volunteer, wanting to be part of this initiative. You get far more by being sweet than you do by being aggressive. When it will fail, if you do big bangs, so let's say you roll out a system, you say, right, everybody's going to adopt Project X. We're going to go now. It's rolling out next week. You've got no choice. You're going to hit so much resistance. You're not going to be aware of your shadow IT or shadow operators inside the organization. It's going to fail. You want to make sure that you increment it out, you approach slowly, solve small problems, and then solve larger problems. You want to provide good training. So it will fail if you don't train users, so they don't know how to use the tool. They don't know what AI can do for them. You also need to give them support. So when something goes wrong, people know how to support, especially in the pilot stages. Who do they reach out to support them? Normally, when you're doing your pilot stages, you're going to have higher power users who are working on it, who can solve their own problems. But you also need to understand what they do to solve those problems. How do I document the problems they went through so that I understand that when I'm training other people in the organization who are less experienced, what do I need to tell them? And then over-promising by saying, okay, this can do, we're going to save ourselves $15 million every year because of this AI, and it saves you $2 million. It's kind of, is that return right? Is that investment good? It may still be good for your company, but make sure you're realistic on what you're promising. And then make sure you got feedback loops so people can get in touch. People can respond to the tool. They can give feedback into the tool so you can then adapt and learn from there. Okay, so this is a checklist of trying to work out what you need to make sure you have in place. I'll give you 30 seconds while I drink my water to read through this slide. I'm trying to get to the Q&A at the end because we did say 75, so we're overrunning a little bit. I've been too chatty today. So really, what we've done trying to just put together 25 items that you need to check that you have in place when you're doing pre-production launches. It's standard practice. If you do CI/CD product development, you'll have this sort of checklist in place already. And then ROI. These numbers are for very large scale organizations. I have a much better model for small scale organizations to large scale. Come get in touch with myself or Usman, and we can build out an ROI model for you. We can work out how to cost it for you more effectively based on what type of product you're going to do, based on what type of use case you're going to do, because it can be very simple, where you're in the hundreds of thousands in cost and millions in return, and you could also be millions in cost and only hundreds of thousands in return, depending how you model it. I'm trying to build better models for pricing because it's a very hard thing to know how to price. What we want to do is I generally try and bring in things like the NFR costs in there, operational cost, SLA costs in there as well. So we look at our organizational structure, what is the impact? And so when you're doing this, you know, you have a better indication of what you're targeting. And then your return on investment, again, you don't want to put money down unless you're going to get something back from it. And you want to make sure you get a good return on the time spent doing it. So again, we can help you do these calculations as well offline. And then scenario, basically, if you do it properly, you are going to see a return on your investment of AI. AI will improve the way you work. That is a guarantee if you have a successful project and you find a way in good use cases. If you choose poor use cases, you won't see a return on investment. But if you choose good use cases, there is always something inside your organization that AI will help you with. And then basically, these are sort of numbers based on several scenarios I ran in the back end. And it sort of seems to give quite a large return. It's almost like 5%, 10% efficiency on the organizational side for that return. So it was a reasonable size organization, reasonable size return. It's sort of, yeah, it was good for what we want to do. Now, when we actually roll out AI, how do you get that top level engagement and maintain your executive engagement? You want to make sure you have your executive dashboard in place. So you want to look at user adoption. How many people are using the system? How many people are not using the system that should be using the system? So you have so that gives you an indication of what's going wrong, gives you a group of people you can talk to and say, why aren't you using this system? You can get feedback through that mechanism and improve the quality of what you're producing. Your net promoter score generally is done through surveying organizations, clients, your users. You want to make sure they actually have a reasonable way of doing your net promoter score so you can see, is it favorably accepted by the people who use it? You want to see your productivity improvement. So again, productivity, you're looking at reduction in budget for various operations. You're looking at time to delivery. You're looking at cadence of projects. There are very many metrics you can use to do your productivity improvement. It's normally a roll-up metric. Again, we can guide you on how to build these metrics out more system. And then your system uptime is, when did the system go down? How effectively are we doing? Were we taken down because of what reasons? So again, track that, present that to the executive. So you have these 4 very high-level stats saying, system is working. We're seeing 32% productivity improvement. Therefore, we're saving this amount of money. We're overall accepted. We got net positive on our organization. We're still got a little bit lower than we want to be. Our user adoption rate is high, which is good. So our net promoter score needs to be improved. So you can look at this metric and say, okay, let's work on how can we make people use the tool more favorably, look at the tool more favorably. So you can go back and look and start asking, what were the comments that people made when we surveyed them to why the tool is bad? And maybe it's just not worth my time or whatever, but it gives you some information to roll back and start rolling out and improving the score. So make sure you have a dashboard in place so it's monitored. And I would actually show this to the entire organization, not necessarily with the productivity improvement, but look at the user adoption rate. So people actually start seeing who's using it. There's an incentive to use it. And so this is almost the end. Let's just quickly wrap up. For AI, governance has to be done. But governance is all governance really is visibility, authority, and accountability. So make sure someone is accountable, make sure people have the authority to make the decisions they need to make and make sure they understand what decisions they can make and how to escalate. Make sure what you're doing is visible and it is monitored. If you have those 3 things in place, you have governance. Compliance, you want to work towards compliance. I would suggest SOC 2, definitely. Be aware of GDPR if you're working in Europe, because it does have implications on how you store data, and especially if you want to go into California as well, there are implications there. So you want to make sure you understand what the regulation space, the compliance space is like, and you want to mitigate and resolve those problems. We try to present a set of guidelines to work with that in this deck. You also want to make sure your organization is structured for success. Their communication is working well. Technology is not going to solve your problem. It is the people and how they communicate is going to solve your problem. Technology enables that. AI is going to enable communication if you use it properly. It's going to help your team. It's going to help your organization improve. So one of your use cases could be organizational change. It could be a use case could be change management within the organization. So you use AI to improve your organization so you can build AI. So it's a lovely little bit of tautology there. Risk management, make sure you are aware of your risks and you've documented them and you've got your mitigations in place. Now, there is talk that sometimes declaring risk means you open yourself up for liability if you don't respond to them. But make sure you have a reason why you're not responding or how you're responding to those risks. But I would always document your risks. And you can just say this is very low probability, and you can use the numbers to actually say this is a 1 in a million chance. So we don't need to respond to it. Our mitigation is X, but we think it's such a low probability, we're not going to spend time, but at least you've identified a potential problem. And so when it does happen, that 1 in a million chance happens, you have some thought and some thoughts about what to do with it when it happens. Scaling, incremental scaling. Don't roll it to everybody. Roll it out to a few people, get advocates, get evangelists, and then roll out to more people, get more evangelists. They see the impact and then roll it out to the organization. And the ROI is measurable. You can create metrics where you can measure how you've improved the organization. So when you're doing business intelligence projects, we have ROI, which is basically looking at our cost of development. We have metrics and reports to track. AI is the same. There are the similar metrics that we can do: productivity improvement, cost improvement, time to delivery improvements. Make sure you have a way of tracking the change over time. So start doing your metrics to track how you work currently. And then when you roll AI, you'll see those improvements and it'll give you something to target for. And then when we're rolling out, what do we do? What's our 90-day action plan? So I'm going to go away. I'm all inspired. David's said lots of great things. I want to build AI. First thing, engage David and Usman and various other people to help you build out. But if you want to do your own plan, get your governance in place. So get your visibility, account authority, and your accountability in place so people know who's what's doing what. You got C-class guy in, so everybody is advocating for the product. Make sure you got ways of feeding back and choosing what use cases to have, and it's communicated to the team. You then want to plan what you're going to do, pick your use cases, and make sure you deliver on a small set of use cases. Do your pilot, and then once your pilots roll out, work out how to scale that pilot to production, and then you go back and pick up new use cases and go through the same loop and refining all the 4 stages, your governance mechanisms as you become more formal in governance. Your planning processes start bringing in the PMO and your product planning systems in place so it's more aligned with how you work, and you gradually scale in an iterative process. You can use this 90-day plan as an iterative cycle for large-scale deployment within the organization. That's one reason why I delayed it here. And if you notice from the timeline, actually the timeline's disappeared, this was about a quarter-long project. So basically 90-day action, so 3 months, 1 quarter. So for that, you can use this as a loop for every single new initiative you do. And so governance is in place. Do we need to change governance? No, we don't. It's good. Okay, planning. What do we need to plan? Okay, we've already got that plan in place for use case 1. It's the same. We can use similar plan, but we got a different data set. Pilot execution, we're changing X, Y, and Z. So you have your target, your current gap target architecture. You roll that out. Again, you know what your pilot execution is going to be included, what capabilities you're changing, what capabilities you're affecting. And then you scale out to production. Then you can actually say, okay, these capabilities can now be replaced with this AI tool that we've just built. And then the final bit is Q&A.
Yeah,
I
I
got
am
the
ready.
email there. So questions, and then from the floor.
Yeah, thank you, David. It was very informative, and I'm sure like everybody enjoyed, and there are a lot of takeaways for everyone. But coming back to the productivity gains and ROI, I want to talk a bit about that. So
Mm,
there's a there's general skepticism. What I see, uh, people in industries which are not really tech industries or legacy industries, generally speaking. There's a general skepticism regarding productivity gains when it comes to AI. And even in your
Mhm,
presentation, you've acknowledged that uh, there's a probability thing around it. It's probabilistic around how you apply it. So
mhm.
because the AI investment involved is indirect, like in terms of productivity gains, there's a probability involved, and the gains are probably indirect. W-
Mm.
I'm just trying to understand, like, what would be the compelling reason uh, to make things more certain and less probabilistic for boards to actually go ahead and approve this investment because it's a transformation after all.
Um, so that's it's probably about three different questions in there. So in terms of productivity gains for an organization and for non-tech AI systems who want to deploy AI into the system, um, one thing you're going to do is choose your use cases. So let's say you are a what's a
Like
good
for
use case
example,
for
real
this?
estate, right? Real estate or fintech,
I was
like
trying not to use a real estate
finance.
example, but yeah, no, I was trying to find a different one. But if let's say you're
let's
looking at,
let's
let's
do
take a very simple
finance.
use cases. Okay, so you're looking at, let's say you've got some regulation coming down the pipeline, you've got some documentation, some regulations coming down the pipeline,
Hmm.
and you want to do, or even you've got an agreement you're signing and you want to create new agreements.
Yeah.
There are AI tools that people have written to do summation, aggregation, differences between technical documents. So if you look at something like Clio, they're building out these tool set to actually do effective summarization of legal documents. There is a group that's just presented a Rawleyism contract negotiation tool that's using AI in a um, Rawleyism combative unit where they basically say, this is your goal. So you got two agents with two sets of goals, and they negotiate over the same contract. So they each make changes to the contract to get to their goal. And what they do is they stop when they've hit no entropy or no change in that
Mhm.
contract between the iterations. That paper is going to get released in February. There was a talk about it last week. The guy who developed that is actually a Vancouver-based AI person. Um, I'd recommend telling your clients to go to Vancouver AI. They'll get some fantastic insights. Um, but in terms of productivity gains, is you'll find these small little use cases like contract negotiation is lengthy. If you use AI agents to do contract negotiation, where you're just basically working through clauses and facts within that contract, and you're negotiating facts in a contract or opinions in a contract, you can have an agent that can do a reasonably good job at that if you have a good corpus of information. So you'll need to set up your corpus, your RAG system, so it knows what to draw from. You can do local training on the LLM so it has your voice. And then you can use that as a scenario situation. So the Rawleyism one, there are situations where companies are using it internally prior to going to negotiate with a customer. They're actually rolling through, these are the likely changes they're going to make if I understand the customer properly.
Hmm.
And then they had the choice of saying, we either change our contract so we can minimize those changes the customer wants to make, or we can give them the final version and say, we went for a combative approach to develop this contract. We believe this should satisfy both sets of requirements. These are the assumptions we made about you guys for developing it. So now you've reduced their cost of work because now you're presenting a contract which is potentially more likely to be acceptable to them and more agreeable. So there are various ways you can use these tools, and there are productivity gains. The only way you really see those gains, though, are really the time it takes to go from contract initiation to contract completion. So you
Hmm.
see an improvement in that pathway. And sometimes tracking that is hard. But if you're a lawyer, if you're a legal firm, you will have ways of tracking your inputs. If you are a surveying firm, whatever you're doing, those sort of things, there is a monitor from first email in, first contract negotiation complete, contract signed. You'll have those main gates tracked somewhere. So you should see a net improvement in that timeline, how long it takes to go from X to complete. And so that's just simplest way of doing productivity gain. And then
Yeah.
you've got the other ones where you look at CPU cycle, use of computers, and there's other things where you can actually infer productivity gain by how busy the computers are, or volume of emails going in and out. So what you'll do is you hopefully should see a reduction in emails going in and out of your organization because things are more effective. So you'll see there are intrinsic and extrinsic measures of control. From my BI days, we used to find all these ways of tracking, because sometimes when you roll out a BI system, they don't know how long it takes to generate a report. They didn't know, they had no way of monitoring that stuff. But we wanted to provide a cadence improvement, and we wanted to demonstrate a cadence improvement. So we found ways of working out, deducing how long it took for that report to get developed to when it got released, and accuracy. So we looked at various mechanisms, and we talked to the businesses we generally dealt with and say, do you mind if we collect data on this thing? And we go historically back, because there's a historical record in emails we could use, or there's a historical record in files that we can use. So you can, our simplest system we did is we actually scanned the file structure. So we looked at the date the file was created and the date the file was last created, last modified, and use that as how long it took to generate that report file. And then we use that, and there was a reduction in time it took for that report file to be generated. And so there are various mechanisms you can use. So again, engage someone like us, myself, you, or other SIs, and in terms of ROI, in terms of measuring and modeling how it's going to impact, we can give you some very good, strong advice about that.
Yeah, I think that actually seems to be the defining factor. Even in the example that you gave about the guy who posted on Reddit and had to shut down his company after a week. Uh, you need somebody to actually steer the process and make sure the use cases are properly aligned with the implementation for it to be a successful investment. So definitely that seems to be the takeaway for me, and I guess for many here. Uh, what would be the single? I think we're actually already almost 90 minutes in, so I'll just ask one more question and then maybe we can finish at that. So what's a single action executives should be taking in the next 30 days if you just have to say one action?
I would say the action is get a bare bones governance structure in place. So get your visibility worked out. What do you see in your organization? What can you track in your organization? Get your authority channels. So who is responsible? Who can make decisions in the organization and what types of decisions they can make? And then make sure that someone is accountable for those decisions. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the delegate control. Your dotted lines in your organization are understood. It's the simplest way of doing governance. You'll find if you just do those 3 levels, you'll actually find your governance across your organization will be better defined. You'll find there'll be a net improvement because now people know that I can make this decision. Because sometimes when I've been in organizations is people don't want to make decisions. They don't realize they can make decisions. They're waiting for someone else to make a decision. There's a cadence loss there. When if you actually communicate saying you have the authority to make this type of decision. And so if you do like federated structures within organizations, I have a couple of frameworks I'm developing, Spore and Trellis and a few others like that, which are sort of trying to work out how to help businesses understand and structure themselves so they can deliver for their market, and they set their organizational structure. So when you set your organizational structure is you build that delegate governance structure in at that point. So it's not governance as a separate entity. It's this is the governance part of this role, and this is the governance description. Everybody has a governance flag inside their job description. And then it's built in and it's communicated and it's reinforced. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, that helps. That helps. So yeah, thank you very much, David. I think we are almost at the 90-minute mark. I guess we'll be ending it here. We don't have any questions in the chat. So thank you very
No
much.
one else has any questions. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, everybody. And thank you for letting me discuss my opinions and thoughts. And hopefully this will resonate with you. Don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Usman. You've got our LinkedIn details because you came in through LinkedIn. Ping me, send a connection request. I'm happy to connect and chat to you about this. So, yep.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you very much.